Welcome to Dollar Gujarati, a show about successful Gujarati entrepreneurs and professionals in America. We talk with them about their ideas and struggles on the road to success in this land of opportunity. As immigrants ourselves, we want to understand the different paths that successful immigrant Gujaratis have taken to establish themselves. This will also help us to navigate our journey in America.
Hey everyone, today we have as a guest who is decades ahead of his generation, Mr. Sam Pitroda. He is an innovator, engineer, and an entrepreneur. He is best known as the father of Indian Telecom. He is the man behind the STD and PCO booths that have enabled us Indians to speak to each another and across the world. He has served as an advisor to Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi and has led 6 successful technology missions. And if this is not enough, he also has close to 100 patents in his name and has published 5 books. I am very honored to have you on our show today, sir, and excited to hear your entrepreneurial journey. Sam, sir, a lot of our listeners have moved to America to study for their master's programs. Some of them had parents who shifted to America for their studies and now were born in and were born in the US. What was your story of entering into America?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I'm delighted to be with you to talk to young Gujaratis all over the world. Not too long ago, I was also, like many of the young people you are reaching out to, I went to college in Baroda, got a BSc in physics, and then studied master's in physics. And during my studies, one fine morning, I saw in the newspaper that President Kennedy has decided to take man onto the moon. I was young, and I decided that it would be romantic to be part of this mission. Not knowing enough, decided to go to college here. I was going to study for PhD in physics, but then I had a girlfriend in India. And my hormones had taken over. So I really wanted her to come to America first. And PhD was going to take about 5-7 years. So I decided to change my subject, went to electrical engineering, got my master's in 9 months, called my girlfriend here, and we got married here and started our life, settled here, had children. And this was sort of a brief history of my coming to America. A lot of friends helped. I have a very close friend of mine, Bhupen Trivedi from Godara. He and I came together. We have been friends since 1958. We are still very close friends. He lives in Chicago. And I've been very lucky to have a lot of good Gujarati friends for the last 50, 60 years. They are my family. And they have grown up together with me. We studied, we interacted, we have been in touch all along. And I've been very fortunate to have some great friends in life.
Wow, that's so interesting. So when you came to America, you said on the way you stopped in London and you knew somebody in London. So at least your time in London was you had somebody to show you around. But when you came to America, did you know anybody out here? I mean,
not a soul, not a soul. I had $40 in my pocket, beside $360 for tuition. Did not know anybody. And sometimes ignorance is a great asset. If I think of all the things I did then, I would probably have a heart attack now. It was really a journey in unknown. I'd never used telephone in my life before coming to America because telephone was only for the rich in India. I wasn't too rich to have phone. And if somebody had a phone, he was too rich to be my friend. So there was no need to call anybody. I had never seen television, but I knew how to design one. But I had not seen television. But I knew the
Wow.
theory of it because of my master's in physics and electronics. So it was really a journey in unknown. It was romantic, risky. It was challenging, daunting at times. But every moment was a challenge. Every moment was a discovery. Every moment was a curiosity. I'll give you one example. We were supposed to land in New York, and then we ended up landing in Montreal because of snowstorm. So in Montreal, we were put up in a fancy hotel, 5-star hotel. I'd never been to 5-star hotel in my life. Okay. So we go to this hotel. This is before landing in America. And I was fascinated with the doorknob because I had never seen a doorknob. We had only latches. Apne paas hakad ke na?
Sakad Kadi.
We had only that. We had never seen doorknob. So I thought this was a pretty interesting invention. You do this and it goes inside. You do this and it comes out. And I was fascinated. So then I locked myself out of my room. I went downstairs and the fellow says, look, here is a coupon for free meal. Why don't you go to a restaurant here? And as part of this, you get a free meal. So we say, okay, let's go to a restaurant. We go there. And the menu is in French because we are in Montreal. Even if it was in English, we wouldn't know what was on the menu except French fries and toast. So I asked the guy, I said, what is your specialty? He said, steak. I said, I'll have one. I had no idea what it meant. So immediately he said, how do you want? And I didn't know what it meant. I said, what do you mean? He said, how do you want? I said, what does it mean? He says, you want well done, medium, or rare? I had no idea what he meant, but I understood rare. So I said, rare. And I get my meal, which is rare steak, and Bhupen Trivedi, who is a Brahmin, highly educated family. His father was a lawyer. His grandfather was a lawyer. So he ordered French fries and bread. And when my plate came in, he said, you idiot, do you know what you have on your plate? I said, no. He said, this is cow's meat. And the red stuff is not ketchup. He said, it's blood. I said, okay, I'll eat it. I ate it. So it was really an adventure at every step. And I enjoyed it.
It's really amazing how you had a very open mind to, try out all these new things because
I had determined and decided that I am in new world. Okay, if I want to live like the old world, why did I come here? Then I should have stayed there.
That is so true.
Okay.
So
if I'm here, I got to explore the world. I'm here to explore the world. And I can't have any taboos. Okay. No taboos, no untouchability. Everything is great. Everybody is wonderful. Everybody, whatever they do, I do it also. Okay. And that has been my sort of way of doing things all along. We all have our own way of looking at life. Not that I'm right and you are wrong and somebody else is wrong. We all have our own journey.
So in your journey, when you came to, say, New York or Chicago, did being part of the Gujarati community help you out? Like, were you able to get in touch with Gujaratis who were here?
We had a lot of Gujarati friends, mainly from Baroda. And, part of insecurity in you unconsciously took you to Gujarati friends because you are more comfortable. You could be more open. You could relate to things. So Baroda was familiar to all of us. And we sort of became friends through contacts and connections and stories. Not that non-Gujaratis were not friendly. They were equally nice. They were equally generous. They were equally friendly. I had several non-Gujarati friends from South India, from, Bihar, UP. They were equally good. But Gujaratis you could relate to because of your food, conversation, all that. And I'll give you one example. Once we were traveling in an old car from New York to Buffalo. We were going to go to Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls.
There were 8 people in a car. Okay. All students. One friend had a wife of his, Rani, so Rani was with us. And there's a Chinese friend of ours who was driving. And he kept driving very hard and car just gave up. Transmission failed. At 2:00 in the morning, we are on the road. Police comes in and tows us and puts us next to the gas station. So in the morning, we could get it repaired. And it was cold. So we were all sitting there in the car and all. There was no place to go. It was 2-3 o'clock in the morning. So I decided to go to telephone booth and look at list of Patels. The first Patel was Arun Patel. Okay. So I pick up phone and call Arun Patel. It's 3:00 in the morning. I said, Arun, we are a bunch of Gujaratis. We are in trouble. Come right now. It's a silly thing to ask somebody to come at 3:00 in the morning, guy we never met. So he said, where are you from? So I said, from Baroda. So great. He said, I'm also from Baroda. So he comes with blankets and pillows and all. And as I see him, he's my classmate from Baroda. Arun Patel. We went to school together. So he looked at me, he said, oh my God. He said, come on, go home. Let's go home. So he took everybody home. And that's Gujarati connection.
So moving on to a little bit about how you got your first job, or even more particularly, like how did you earn your first dollar in the US? And how did that
I
feel?
had no money. Like I said, we had about $40 left. My friend Bhupen had a scholarship. He was going to study PhD in organic chemistry. So he had a assistantship. So I found out that there was a professor in the chemistry department in physical chemistry, Dr. Trapp. He needed a technician. Bhupen really found that out and told me that, look, there may be an opportunity to be a technician. So I went to Professor Trapp. And I said, look, physical chemistry, I have a master's in physics. I can help you do all the experiments and take good results. And I didn't know what it meant, because he was working on electron microscope and, stuff like that. So he checked me out and he said, okay, you have a job. I think it was $1.70 per hour or something, which I thought was great. So, he said you can work 20, 30 hours a week. So that got me out of poverty instantly.
Ghar kharch nikle go.
Yeah, so every week I'll be in the lab for 20, 30 hours, read there, do some work here and there, take some results. And, I started earning instantly. Okay, it was a little bit of money, but it was useful. And then Bhupen was a great support because he was earning, and finally got a job in Chicago for, I think, $550 a month, and I was happy. And then called my girlfriend and she came here and, got married with $150 total in the pocket. The day we got married, we had $1 left, total wealth. Okay. So it was very romantic.
One of the things that I really like about you, sir, is that you were in a long distance relationship, you did a second master's, and you started your own startup all before this was the cool thing to do or the normal thing to do. 50 years ago you were doing things which people are doing today. So how did you, I mean, make this tough decision of starting your own business?
Well, I had worked for a company called GTE, General Telephone and Electronics, for about 8 years. Had about 30 patents, and every year there will be a dinner in the honor of all the patent awardees. You'll get a certificate, everybody will clap. And then I was wondering, I said, look, all this invention, I don't get anything except little certificate. And the company was nice. They were very good to me, no question. So there was another group of sort of entrepreneurs in Chicago, Downers Grove. They were looking for new products. So through somebody, they reached out to me. And I was thinking of leaving and doing something about my own. So it worked out well. And I joined hands with them and started a company called Westcom Switching. This was 1974. I was 32 years old. I had a big family, so it was a little bit of a risk, but worked out well. And built that business. And in 79, sold it for $50 million cash in those days. Okay, I made a little bit of money, not all of it. And then I became head of Rockwell switching operation with 3 locations: Dallas, Chicago, and Cedar Rapids. So I was 38-year-old. I had a corporate jet of my own. I had office and apartment in Dallas. I had office in Cedar Rapids. I had office in Chicago. I was living it, I mean, on top of the world in that sense at 38. We were part of Rockwell. So we were making space shuttles, So every time there is a space launch, I'll go there with everybody, hobnob with all the astronauts, the man who was in charge of Apollo 13, okay, became a good friend of mine. Captain Lovell is still a friend. Captain Lovell gave me a little gift. Then Buzz Aldrin, the second man who landed on the moon. Yeah, so, we were living it.
Wow, this is really amazing. Because the thing that inspired you to come to America was Kennedy's speech about how they're going to put a man on the moon. And here we are, say, I think 15 years later, where you are actually working with the space industry in America and helping people in the Apollo missions. Like that is, I think...
I didn't have anything to do directly with it. My company had.
Yes. But you were part of that ecosystem.
We were part of it. We were, every launch we will go there, sit there, have a, nice drinks with everybody, hobnob with everybody. It was great. And Rockwell was a wonderful company.
Can you tell us more about your time with Westcom, about how you got financing for it, how you convinced other people to join you?
So I really gave them a presentation on digital switching for small companies, PABX and all that, 2009 PABX to be designed from scratch. In those days, microprocessors were just introduced. When Intel was formed, I was there. I knew the guys, okay, Bob Noyes, Gordon Moore, their guru who was Lester Hogan, okay. And I used Intel's first microprocessors for telecom. 4-bit microprocessor, 8-bit microprocessor. And our idea was to use microprocessors for digital switching, which was very new in 74. Microprocessors were just being introduced. And then the idea was to really use this product for airline reservations called automatic call distributors. So when people call airline for booking ticket, operators pick up phone and book your ticket and all that. So we did all that in early days for American Airlines, United Airlines, all the airlines, Continental, you name it. We did all there. And that's where I connected with Captain Lovell Captain Lovell, after he came back from Apollo 13th mission, set up a business in Houston. And he was my distributor for the product I developed with the airlines.
If you were to see today's servers, I think the internet itself is based on this underlying infrastructure.
We practiced all of the things that Silicon Valley talks about it and management books write about it today in 70s.
I
flat organization.
You were 50 years ahead of
open
the modern age.
Workspace. Okay, these were all, we practiced it in 74. Okay, non-hierarchical management. Okay, they're all standard stuff we did. It was out of necessity. Okay, and now there are books written on it.
Yeah, there are books written on every individual topic now.
Yeah. It's crazy. People think they've discovered something so unique and all that. And, sometimes you laugh at it, but that's life. Okay, you were too far ahead of your time. And pioneers always have arrows in the back. So then I went to India. After I made a little bit of money, I wanted to take my parents to see Taj Mahal. Because now their son had arrived. Their son was, reasonably rich. I never had any money. So for the first time, I made a little bit of money. So inside me wanted to sort of get parents' blessing and a little bit of, show off saying, Dad, we made it. So I met them in Delhi. They came from Orissa. We were going to go to Taj Mahal, three of us, my father, mother, and myself. And I tried to call my wife back to Chicago from hotel and couldn't make a phone call. It just didn't work. 79.
This was 1979.
Yeah, phone worked in India. You have to make a lightning call sometimes. Sometimes you have to wait for 2-3 days to make a call. People don't realize that. Young people think. It used to take 10 years to get a telephone connection.
Whoa. 10 years.
Yeah. If you want to apply for telephone, people would apply for telephone now and they'll get after 10 years. That was a normal thing to do.
And today,
not just in India. It was similar in France. It was similar in many countries. Okay. Getting telephone was not very simple. I remember reading in the Wall Street Journal once that half of the people in France are waiting for telephone and other half are waiting for dial tone. US was the leader and AT&T had set up the best telephone network in the world here. Okay.
So you found this huge problem.
Yes.
You couldn't.
Then I decided that I'm going to spend now 10 years of my life in fixing India's telephone. Because I realized that connectivity, IT, telecom will change the face of India. I was convinced that if we focus on connecting India with the diversity India has, and especially connect rural India, India will be a different nation. And I had done a little bit of work here in connectivity. Not that I knew all the answers. But again, ignorance is a great asset. If I had known everything I know today about India, I would have never tried it. Then I decided, I came home and I told my wife that I'm going to spend, next decade of my life connecting India. How? I didn't know. But I had made enough money, so I was not worried about salary anymore. But what looked like a lot of money then turned out to be very little money in hindsight.
Correct.
I worked in India without salary for a decade during Rajiv Gandhi's time, spent all the money I had. But going back, the only way to translate this idea to connect India was to really meet with Prime Minister of India.
Yes, so you have been associated very closely with Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. So how did an engineer end up meeting one of the most successful prime ministers of India?
There also Gujarati connection helped. My father-in-law knew Maharaja of Baria, Devgad Baria, Jaideep Singh ji. He was a great, grand old man. He introduced me to him. My father-in-law introduced me to him. He was in Delhi. He was a member of the parliament. Very generous man. I went to his house and immediately he said, okay, you come every day. We'll have gin and tonic together. So I'll go. He will have all his dogs. And he was a great man. And he, through somebody, connected me to Mrs. Gandhi. Okay. And he was a wonderful human being. I enjoyed his company. Good to talk to, good to advise. And, through him, I asked for a 1-hour meeting, didn't get it. Waited for 8 months. After 8 months, I got a meeting for an hour with Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. And she had her entire cabinet there. And that's when I met Rajiv Gandhi for the first time. I'd never met him before. This was 1981. He had her entire cabinet. Pranab Mukherjee, Venkatraman, all the key people. There were about 20, 30 people, Arjun Singh, Gundu Rao, to name a few. And Rajiv had his friends, Arun Nehru, Arun Singh, Vijay Dhar, and all. And that gave me an opportunity to sort of articulate the idea of telecom and connectivity and software and all that. And Mrs. Gandhi gave me the political will. Says, okay, go do it. And then when she died, Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister. And he understood what I was trying to do. And he was the backbone of what I did. He gave me total freedom, autonomy, confidence. And then we came closer, we became friends. And I would meet with him regularly. And we built using Indian talent, Indian infrastructure, all the products that India would need for rural connectivity, urban connectivity. And we set up a Center for Development of Telematics with focus on indigenous development, local talent, local production, ancillary industry, Indian model of development, rural telecom. All of these things were critical to a new strategy to focus on accessibility as opposed to telephone density. To me, there were 3 important elements. One, political will, which came from Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi and his Congress party. 2, domain expertise, which came from me. I knew the field and I knew exactly what to do, how to do. To a point, I could take it forward. Not that I had all the answers. And 3, young talent. India had the young talent coming out of IITs, IIMs, and we hired 400-500 young people. And they, in turn, built the infrastructure required. I had to make a decision, major decision in my life, which was, do I want to do business in telecom? Or I want to use my telecom know-how to build a nation? 2 separate things. If I wanted to build a business, today I would be a multi-billionaire in telecom. No question. I was there. Yeah. I had all the capabilities. I made several billionaires, I would say, with a little bit of arrogance. Okay. But I had no interest in building a business because that was too small a task. Building a business is very different from building a nation. And to build a nation, you need political will. If you want to do anything on a large scale, you need politics. If you want to build your own business, whether it is Google or whatever, you don't need politics that much, to a point. Once you become bigger, you need politics. All these big businesses are in politics.
So you were very successful in India. I would say that a lot of our infrastructure is what it is today, thanks to you. But then after an unfortunate event, which led to the assassination of Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, you took a very, very tough decision of moving your family back from India to America. So what led you to make that decision? What was going on in your mind?
First of all, I had then spent almost a decade in India. Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated brutally, and that broke my heart. In addition, I realized that I'd run out of money. I had two children ready to go to college. I didn't have money to pay further tuition. I did not want them to study in India because I didn't want to ruin their life for my kicks. They had given enough to me by moving back to India for 4 years, 5 years. My son and daughter had come back to America anyway to go to, school here so they can then get better grades to go to good university. So I had to make a decision that it is time to put my personal life in order. My wife and my children had sacrificed enough. Okay. So I decided to come back. But then I didn't have a visa to come back. I had given up my US nationality. So I came as a tourist. But you couldn't work as a tourist. So I had to restart my life. I had a patent in electronic diary that came in handy. Casio, Sharp, Toshiba, Texas Instrument, Hewlett Packard, and Radio Shack were using my patent. So I sued all of them in the Cook County Court. I settled out of court with all of them, got a little bit of money to restart my life. Then I started a business, manufacturing business in Milwaukee, in Menominee Falls, built a factory. At one time we had 400 people there. But that didn't interest me. Building a plant and running a company, okay, fine, nice. Because the romance was much more interesting. So then I decided that what I did in India, I would like to do it for other developing countries in Africa, Latin America, and all. Because I privatized telecom in India. And telecom was not privatized in most of the world. So I worked with United Nations International Telecom Union to help set up a bank to privatize telecom world over. A bank was called WorldTel. I became chairman and CEO of that bank based out of London.
Okay.
So I ran a bank for 7 years, commuting between Chicago and London. So I'll spend 2-3 weeks there, come back for a week, then go back for 2-3 weeks. I had an apartment there. I had a fancy office there, a team there, and I ran a bank, investment bank. I did the first investment to privatize telecom in Mexico of $100 million. Yeah. So I did that for 7 years, and that was a little interesting because then you could make a dent globally.
Correct.
I helped privatize telecom in Africa. Okay, I went to Russia. I went to China. I met with the Chinese telecom minister in 90s, and went to Brazil, went all over. Okay. And then when telecom was essentially privatized all over the world, our job of the bank was over. We closed that. And I again came back to Chicago full time and built a business in mobile wallet and sold that business to MasterCard in 2013. I never took venture capital money. Never.
Why didn't you take venture capital?
I'll tell you why. Because I was too busy doing other things. And I didn't want somebody to come and say, hey, why are you doing things in India? Okay, whenever you take somebody else's money, you have moral responsibility.
Correct.
Okay, they can come and say, oh, you're spending too much time in India. You're spending too much time in London. I don't want that. I want my freedom. Okay. And you have to give something up.
Correct.
And to give something up is you're not going to build a big empire because then you are stuck with that.
Correct.
I didn't want to build one big company where your entire life, 20, 30 years goes in building $10 billion, $2 billion operation. Forget it. Then you lose your freedom.
Correct.
Because money is there for your freedom. Okay. I didn't want to lose my freedom to money.
As we find out, he did exactly that. Mr. Sam Pitroda was not just an entrepreneur, but a serial entrepreneur. Stay tuned for the second part to listen to more about what ventures he is working on today and how he is able to successfully build his companies.
Thanks for listening to the show this week. And if you want to ask us any questions or want to see someone specific on our show, write to us at dollargujarati@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us at dollargujarati. Make sure you don't miss any episode by subscribing to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or however it is that you get your podcast. I'm Dakshaday Shah, and you've been listening to Dollar Gujarati.